Hi everybody, it's Tim. It is October 20th, 2024. It's gonna be really warm here in New York today. It's gonna be like summertime. I'm very happy about that. It's still a little cool this morning, which is why I'm wearing a shirt. But what I wanna do today is take you through the process of building a palm tree winter protection frame. And so I've gone through many different methods trying to do this, and let me point out, this is just for my more tropical palms. I do a completely different method for my Trachycarpus fortunae, which is your windmill palm. That I don't even mess with until what we have in US here, the holiday Thanksgiving, which is the end of November. So what I'm dealing with right now today is just the tropical palms. So I follow a lot of people on YouTube and what they're doing, and there's some amazing structures out there. There's some very basic structures. There's so many different ways to do this, so I'm just showing you my way, or at least the way I like the most at the moment. I've been changing it, and I keep changing it, and I keep changing it. So if you look back at my old videos, you're gonna see that's a completely different method. So right off the bat, this is a great board if you're using wood. So this is 1.5 by 2.5. It's not a 2x4. So this makes it much, much lighter to use. I get these at my local home center, Home Depot, Lowe's, they all have them. They're cheaper than 2x4s. They're really lightweight. You can pick them up with one hand. And that's the beauty of this, is because with the 2x4s, which you will see back over here, this is an old structure. Well, it's an old structure that I updated to a new structure, and I'm working on it right now. So I didn't want to waste the wood, so I'm using it, but that is not the ideal. This is the ideal. This is what you want to use if you're using wood, because that will make it much easier to carry around and much, much, much easier to put up, especially if your palms are getting really, really tall. So today I'm doing one for my Canary Island date palm. It is getting, this summer it just took off. In fact, it took off so much, many of you said you've got to move that palm, it's too close to the koi pond, and I'm gonna do that in the spring, but in the meantime I have to cover it for the winter. So the old structure is being put around a smaller palm down by the pool, and today I'm gonna build a structure for the Canary Island date palm, which is up by the koi pond. I'm going to show that in just a second here, but yeah, it's outgrowing everything. And then if any of you have tips on transplanting a Canary Island date, I would love to hear that, because I am nervous about this. It took forever to get that poor palm to really take off. Now it is, and I wasn't even sure the first year I put it in if it would survive the winter. So that's kind of why. You hear the boats out there on the river. Anyway, so this is my process. I'm going to walk you through it today. So this is the date palm. It looks really nice in this position. It's beautiful here, but it is going to outgrow it, and I'm going to show you a little bit closer up view. If it starts getting wider, which it will, it's going to be too hard to cover in the winter. I just want to give you a look at this, but it is in a nice place, but it does have to be moved. So as you can see, it is way, way too close to my waterfall and my koi pond. But for the meantime, it looks really spectacular right here. But covering it, if it gets much wider, I'm going to be into the rocks, and that's a whole other ordeal. And this one had been in a pot for many, many years. I finally put it outside. It survived by covering every winter, but it's finally taking off, and then I'm going to have to move it in the spring. But back to building the structure. So when you buy, try to get straight boards, not warp boards. That's really important. And then make sure you have a vehicle like my Honda CR-V that has 568,000 miles on it, can fit 8-foot boards. Now here I'm showing some of the foam board to just kind of get the idea of how you measure out. So if I have 2 feet wide of foam board, don't worry about how thick they are right now. I'm going to talk about that later. But if I have 2 feet, I need to build the structure a little less so that I can do the foam board around the structure. So I'm going to make it even at one end, and then on the next end, it's going to go out an inch or so, or the width of the foam board beyond the frame, so that the other one just goes right into it. So when you do your measurements, you have to make sure that your wood structure is just a little bit smaller than 2 feet if 2 feet is what you want. So that's really important with the measurements, and I screw it up all the time. But once you figure it out, it kind of works, and then they just kind of fit together nicely like that. Okay, so I'm in my garage, which is full of plants because I brought a lot of things in. And you can also see old structures back there of things I've done in the past that I'm gonna reuse some of the components, but we are building a new one today. So I recommend a flat surface to work on. Unfortunately, my entire yard is on a hill, so I don't have a whole lot of options on where to do this. So I'm doing it in the garage right now, probably the best place. And it's not gonna be perfect because I'm not gonna go through and put a square on everything. I'm just gonna try to get this together as quick as possible and show you that you can do this without much time and effort here. So here my board's laid out on the floor, ready to go. And now I need to cut what goes on the inside. So here I am, measuring things out. I know my width, and I'm going to do 3 of them because I want a top, a bottom, and a middle support that I'm going to hook around the actual palm. And then I need to cut one for the moisture barrier at the top as well. So this is a little bit tedious, but if you can cut them all at once and you have your measurements right, which is the most important part, that helps. So before I even put these boards together, I'm going to mark a few things. So I'm coming up 2 feet from the bottom, and I'm marking where my brace board is going to go on both sides. So that will help later, because once I get everything in place, it's a little harder to mark. And the other thing I haven't done is cut the wood for the moisture board that holds up the moisture barrier at the top. But I'm going to mark 5 inches down from that up on the top so that I have a marking for that as well. So that hopefully will help and save you a little time. So I'm basically going to do 1 screw in each corner, top and bottom, first, just to make sure that everything looks like it's pretty square. And I know there's a better way to square all of this, but I'm trying to do this quickly and it will work, I promise you. If your carpet works. And you just go around and do all 4 sides. Not that hard. So we've got our bottom board in. We've got the brace board, and that's what we're going to use to brace around the palm tree to hold our structure in place. The top board is in. I've got my line drawn for my moisture barrier board, and this can just be, I'm going to use really scrap wood for this to put in, and that's just for a thin piece of insulation board to go in as a moisture barrier, so that as the heat rises to the top of the structure, water doesn't drip down on the palm. so we've got the moisture barrier in now, leaving just enough room to slide something in. And so side one is ready. Now just repeat the exact same thing for side two. So now the two sides are done, and I need to cut the little boards that are going to go around the palm. And to make the size right, I want to take the width minus 1.5 inches on each one. So I'm basically taking the width minus 3 inches so that they will line up perfectly there. And that way I will have the measurements that I want. So here is my palm. It's tied up now. I use a zip cord and bungee cords. Zip cords work really well. Sometimes you have to put the bungees in place first, especially with the Washingtonias. This one wasn't that hard to do. This one actually did pretty well, despite the sharp needles. And here you can see my friend Brennan is helping me, and we're bracing those boards around the palm, and this will hold the structure in place so it doesn't blow over. I used to try to tie these things down, and it was so difficult, and they would just sit in the box without, and then I decided to do with my Trachycarpus. What I do that is use the wood around the palm to brace the structure, which makes it a whole lot easier to do. And then you're only making 2 sides and the brace, and then just putting your foam board around that. Okay, so Christmas lights. I know a lot of people use heat cables. A lot of people use some actual little heaters they put in to their palm structures. I have so many palms, it's just easier to do Christmas lights. And you need to make sure that they are incandescent lights. So if you live in Tennessee or someplace like a lot of the palm growers that I follow there, they don't necessarily use these big C9 lights. They use the smaller ones because they can. Up here in New York where I am, even though it's so warm today, I really trust these more. So the best thing to do is wait till the day after Christmas and buy out these lights, because they don't last forever. At least I don't think so. Things go wrong with them, all kinds of stuff. And so I buy a lot of these. I still have a lot in boxes just to make sure I have them. I know a lot of people have said these will eventually be phased out, and when they do that, I will have to find another way to heat these. But in the meantime, while I have them, I'm certainly going to use them. And so what I'm going to do is put a bunch of these lights around my Canary Island date palm today that we built the structure for. And then I'm going to show you how I add a thermocube. And then I also have some lights that I can just turn on, just if I'm worried the thermocube's not coming on, or if I feel like it needs some additional heat. Or in the case of my Washingtonias, just like James Palms does in Canada, I often will turn them on just to keep it drier inside the structure, even if it's not necessarily freezing enough for the thermocube to come on, if that makes sense. So please, if you have any questions, ask me about it, because I'm learning too, and I'm always trying to find the best way, but I'm just showing you what I do here in New York with a lot of palms. So here you can see the wood structures holding the thing in place around the palm. You can see my Christmas lights, and all of these that are attached to the palm will be hooked up to the thermocube. And I try to make the lights face out, but I've never had the lights burn the palm. I haven't had that experience. And then I put more lights around on the top of the box and coming down the sides that I just plug in manually so that I can keep the temperature higher and they're on really cold or damp, wet days. Okay, so now we're ready for foam board. So I'm here in my what appears to be my foam board library, If you saw earlier on one of my other videos, I think you saw how many were back here, and it's a lot, but I've moved a lot of them into place. So when I started with foam board, I was panicked, and you see here, I bought the really thick stuff because I thought that's what I had to do here in New York. And although I still use it because I have leftover and I don't want to waste it, I think it's way too much for Zone 6B New York. And I have been since buying, which is much, much cheaper, much easier to cut, this, which is basically, I think, a 1/2 inch. I've been using an 1.5 inch, where this is really 2 inches here. So you do what's in your budget and what you think is appropriate. If you are in Zone 5, Zone 4, or below, if you don't have enough heat, maybe consider that. But I think this is overkill. I think it's really just too much, and I don't think you need that. But I have so much foam board that I've cut off and used, and it's expensive. So I'm taking some old foam board from a structure that I'm no longer using because I had to upgrade it because it grew too large. And I'm putting, basically, instead of 4 pieces on the canary date palm, I'm putting 8 pieces on. Is that ideal? No, not really. I would rather have one solid piece. But the nice thing about that is that I can open up a half section and see what's going on with the palm. Or if it's really warm out like today in the end of October, I can open it up and then the palm can breathe a little bit, and I can make sure it's okay and all those kind of things, and make sure the lights are working and all of that. So that's what I'm doing today. But I don't want you to think you have to buy the really expensive foam board. You can go much, much cheaper. And I even have some things like, I will even do this, which is just, styrofoam on certain small things. So use what you think you can do and what will work, and talk to other people in your area, like what they're doing. Because I think I've gone way too far with some of mine, and from now on I'm really buying the small stuff. It's so much easier to cut. It's so much easier to put on. You need big, gigantic screws for all of this. So I would definitely say go with that. It's better. So here you can see I've started attaching the foam board. I'm lining it up on one side, but leaving that extra little gap there on the other side because I actually measured this correctly. So I told you before, it's not ideal. I'm doing this in 8 parts rather than just 4 parts. So I'm getting them all in, lined up. I'm gonna leave this side open for right now because it's way too warm. And we even have a prediction of 80 degrees next week. So I'm gonna leave this front side open. I'm just gonna keep adding on here and get the moisture barrier in and the roof on so it's ready to go. And here you can see I'm sliding this in. That can be really thin. It just needs to separate the top from drip. What happens is the moisture goes up, it hits the roof when it's cold, and then it drips down on the palm, and you don't want that. And this little barrier will keep that moisture from dripping on the palm, which is important. And you can see there I've got the roof on now. I'm basically ready to go once I just put this on the front and get my lights plugged in and set up and get the last little pieces on here. So in an ideal world, I would have a temperature gauge for every single palm. But the cheapest way to go is with a thermocube. And sometimes these fail. I test them out, I put them in the freezer, I make sure they work. Even then, sometimes you have to really check. I don't know why they're so iffy sometimes, but if anybody has a better product than this, I would love to know it. But what I like to do is hook that in to a plug that I can reach on the outside of the palm structure. So that way I can plug my Christmas lights in that go to the thermocube, which means it'll come on when it reaches below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius. And then I also have this hooked in to an extension cord where I have another set of lights that I can just manually turn on at night or during the day if I just want to keep the ambient temperature in the box higher. And what I do is I don't put a whole lot of lights on for that, but I put enough on to warm it up in there. And then the key is, if you can, have a remote temperature gauge in the box so that you can tell what's going on. Now, I have so many palms, I think I only have like 7 temperature gauges where I can monitor what's going on from inside the house. But I do have some of these little manual ones that you can buy on Amazon that you basically just hook into the box. The gauge is on the outside and it'll tell you what the temp is in the box. And so that way you can go down on some of your coldest nights and go, okay, it's 40 degrees in the box, or it's 31 degrees in the box, and you might need more lights. So I highly recommend that. But this is the setup I do. And then the main thing I'm gonna do is I always put a light or two from the thermocube on the outside of the box and from my manual entry of plugging it in, so I can see from outside the box if the lights are actually on. And that's a big key too, because you need to know if the lights are actually on or not. And with a box like this, sometimes through some of the cracks you can see if the lights are on, but if this is sealed pretty good, you can't tell. So I always like to have a little bulb on the outside from the wires just on the ground so I know it's coming on in there. If you have a temperature gauge, I guess you don't need it as much because you know what's going on. And when you just have a few palms, it's much, much easier to do, but I've got too many, so I need to know what's happening. And I love when I can just look out and see a bunch of little lights coming on the side of the boxes, and then I know I'm good for at least that night. And lastly, I just wanted to show you that I took Tyvec tape and taped the seam on the inside, since I actually had 8 parts going together rather than 4 parts. And anytime, even on the roof, if you need to do that, you can tape it up a little bit. You'd need to leave some ventilation. So I hope this helped everybody. It's a beautiful day here in October. Boats out on the Hudson River. And please like and subscribe, and please ask me questions, and I enjoy interacting with all of you. So thank you so much for watching.